Hi, hello, my name is Obelisk and this is my channel Book Drawer. For those who don't know, I enjoy looking at queer fiction and occasionally I create images out of them. Today I'm doing the wrap up for April. I have had a bit of a delay in terms of uploading videos at the moment because I've been very busy with work. There is only so many hours in the day and I've actually been doing quite a lot of travelling during this past month, which has meant I have actually done quite a bit of reading. Starting with Music of What Happens by Bill Konigsberg. I really love this book. I think this book is particularly great for a young queer audience, particularly predominantly gay men, because it focuses on two male characters, and you've got Max and Jordan. Max is a bit of a bro dude and into physical fitness, and you've got Jordan, who's more of a poet. They have different relationships with their different types of relationships with their family. In the case of Jordan, he has just lost his father and his mother suffers from mental health issues, whereas Max has a more supportive and nurturing family. And it's more about how they navigate and learn from each other's lives and how they give each other permission to explore both themselves and each other as they get to know each other. I will say that it does deal with some really mature themes in terms of there's issues around sexual health, sexual abuse, exploring mental health, and different forms of abusive relationships. It explores how men can struggle to articulate themselves when they are facing challenging emotional situations, but it actually gives room and breathes life into unpacking what it's like to actually confront these issues and really follow through on them. Next, I want to discuss a memoir called Trans. Now, this is written by Juliet, and it's her reflection on everything leading up to her transition. So, at the start of the book, you actually have her awakening out of her surgery, and then you reflect back on everything that led up to that moment. I really enjoyed her voice within the book, and it was interesting to see her evolution in terms of her understanding her identity and her relationship with her body. The key part for me within her memoir was the fact that she actually writes about her experiences of journalism, and she talks about how she had to kind of negotiate her platform, and she describes how she would introduce little political and gendered related items within her articles, and she had to kind of slip them in. And I felt like a lot of the memoir was doing that at a greater level because she just made these kind of like small, subtle comments which kind of framed and made suggestions without kind of overtly saying, this is what I think and feel. And I thought that was really kind of useful and helpful, and also kind of cunning and insightful the ways that she did that. And she does it repeatedly through. So you kind of, over the period of the memoir, build up a picture of her political stance, but also it helps you question certain things wider. So I like that she is this political animal within the book, but at its heart, it's about someone who just really loves music and loves politics and loves debating and discussing, and it is shaped by their own identity. And I just really enjoyed the process of reading the book, really. The next one which I want to talk about is one which I DNF'd. It's called Cry Destiny by Michael Russell. So I can't even really go into what the book was about because I gave it about an hour, and in terms of as an audio read, it was only about 4 or 5 hours long. But it just had this guy called Scott who was with this guy called Miles, and right towards the beginning there was this very, very graphic sex scene, and I'm not averse to smut. It's just that it just was like something that kind of happened out of nowhere, and then it was reinforced with a load of really, really bad dialogue. And I was like, God, this is like listening to really cheap, bad porn. And it just didn't really go anywhere in terms of what was happening in the book. And I was like, there's other books that I could be reading right now. So I just kind of gave up on it. It didn't interest me because there was nothing substantial underneath what they were talking about. So the next one which I want to talk about, I feel like I have to be quite careful with because it was such a huge book. It's How to Survive a Plague, and it was by David France. So this I did as an audio read. It was 24 hours to listen to. I broke it up over, I think, about the process of the bank holiday weekend. So I actually had some really long, concentrated amount of times while I was doing some arty stuff. But it was just a very, very intense and emotional journey to go through, because it's looking at when AIDS kind of materialized. And what's really interesting about the whole book is it really goes right back to the roots before they even knew what AIDS and HIV was, or having any terminology around it. And people were just dying from all these opportunistic diseases, which they couldn't understand why that was happening, and it was affecting people in terms of having cataracts or dying on just really weird small like funguses. And why was this happening? Why were people's immune systems just being destroyed? And the stats around it is it's staggering. But also what was particularly terrifying is all the structures that were in place at that time, and the lack of education, and the kind of political context of that, and the fact that a lot of predominantly gay men were dying from this, meant that there was a level of disinterest in it. You just feel like you're only touching the tip of the iceberg, really, with the book. But it gives you this tremendous overview and these very personalized accounts where he's chronicled this entire journey and mapped it out. And there's a film of it, which is kind of like the light version of this. And the book really unpacks everything. I haven't actually seen the film, but 24 hours over 2 hours, I could see like it would probably be easier just to go for the documentary. For it to kind of really chronicle each stage and process of those elements has been really beneficial, just in terms of actually understanding the scale, and just how we, like as a species, failed to find ways to overcome that particular plague at that time. And they go into lots of different acronyms, and that became quite challenging actually to listen to over a period of time. And sometimes it is really dense with information. And I think actually it was probably helpful to be doing it as an audio read, because you have someone kind of talking you through everything. Whereas I think if I read it, I'd just be like, this is just so much information. I don't think I can actually retain it. But you just have to kind of go along with it. And there are lots of different individual people who are involved in the activism around it. For me personally, one of the figures who I hadn't really heard any information about was Iris Long. So she actually didn't have any direct relevance or connection to the LGBT community, but her background was actually in pharmaceutical and cancer research. And she had a lot of knowledge and skills and experiences which were really helpful in navigating the language and the terminology within the research of diagnosis, and how they were looking at prevention, and just working out how to resolve, how to handle HIV and AIDS. So she was a part of this kind of working group, which was particularly used to look and focus at those issues, and she helped advocate and communicate between these different groups. A lot of the people who were campaigning were really fighting for their own lives alongside it, so they're wholeheartedly invested in it. And through the course of the book, a lot of the people around David are dying or do die, and it's exhausting to hear in that short period, and you just feel really drained and sorry and saddened for this person to have had to experience that. But then you're knowing across the world, like, people were being affected by this, not just on a one-off occasion, but repeatedly. People that they knew were dying around them over a long period. Just to give it a little bit of context on that, I did have a Google to kind of tally up the numbers, because they do talk progressively through some of the figures, and you lose a sense of scale. But since 1987, the US, as of 2016, ranked up 675,000 deaths. And at its height in 1995, there were 41,699 people who had actually died. I mean, you cannot really grasp those numbers. It's just like, it's impossible really to understand that. But things like the AIDS Memorial Quilt, which covered a huge, vast area of geographical land, just to give that sense of scale, have really helped advocate for the need to find a way of stopping people from dying. And go through this process of reading this history really does just make you feel incredibly lucky to be living in a time today. It feels very difficult to put into words what this book has managed to encapsulate for such an extensive period of time, which had such a tremendous, difficult impact on our community, as well as just on people in general, to kind of actually be able to give it the sense of scale that it deserves. But I do feel very thankful that he was able to actually encapsulate this chronological history of everything that happened, because it just makes you a lot more aware of the rippling impact that it had on so many people. The next one which I want to discuss is The Obelisk, which is by N.K. Jemisin. So this is the second book of the series, because at the end of the first book, the 5th season is triggered, and you are carrying on following the events directly after that. So it's basically split up between two main perspectives. You are following a second-person narrative again, which I kind of find slightly jarring when you're reading it. I think for some people they can really get on board with it, but for me, I kind of went in and out of it, because sometimes you're like really invested and you feel like you are looking and exploring the world through the eyes of that person in that situation. But then there are other elements and times when you're kind of like, I wouldn't have reacted that way, I wouldn't have behaved that way. But then that's also kind of interesting and useful to gain perspectives from other people. So Ensign was running around with Alabaster, who basically was the person responsible for sparking this 5th season. And she's basically cleaning up the pieces. And she's found herself with this group of people, and she is kind of learning how to politically and democratically navigate in a world which has limited resources. There are different communities which are against each other and are after these limited resources. And she has the ability and power within her as an origin to basically kill off people around her if she so chooses. But she actually uses her words and her voice, and she has to learn how to negotiate and use the diplomacy to work with people in a collaborative way. And you can see that's not her natural go-to in her nature, and it's interesting to see her arc in terms of how she develops as a person, where she's holding back, because ultimately she could just make someone shatter into like vibrated pieces. So she is a pretty powerful being. But what I've really enjoyed about this book, I don't want to get into spoilers, but part of this is also about diversity of thought, because she comes from a particular school of thought about how she can yield and her powers, and it has been trained in a specific way. And she comes to this other group of people who have learned to control their powers in a very different way to her own. And it's only through the dialogue that they have with each other that they are able to grow together. And I thought that was a really interesting undercurrent theme within that book, in terms of how people grow and survive through collaboration. I thought that was pretty cool. So I really liked all of those elements within the book, and it's not like something which is really overt or kind of thrown at you as these are things that you should be thinking about. It's just that they're suggested and they're there lying underneath, and I think that's what I love about science fiction, is how it kind of speculates and forces you to kind of reflect on what people do and how they interact with each other. And then finally, the last book which I want to talk about, which is actually an anthology. This is Jen Campbell's The Bill Aquarium. So this is a series of poems which he has written, and I know a lot of people have a lot of love for Jen, as do I, but I managed to pick this up through work and see it a little bit before she released it, which was very exciting, and read through her poems. I mean, what I will say is, in terms of poetry, I don't have like a vast knowledge of poetry at all, and it's something that I'm kind of like, I distance myself from. I'd say it's not something I can actually go to, just because it takes a lot of time and attention to really unpack poems, and I'm quite lazy and just prefer to kind of read through things and be steered towards it. So some of the poems are quite long, some of them quite short. I actually ended up spending like over an hour with my partner debating one poem on a car journey, because he was like, "What are you reading?" And and then we got into a bit of a discussion about what the themes and thoughts of the actual poem and the perspective was. So I haven't really engaged with poetry in that way for a long time, probably not since school. So it was actually quite fun to talk and unpack a poem together, because I just don't do that in the same way as I did at school. So it was quite fun to do that. But some of these are quite unsettling. Some of them I feel like I didn't get, just because some of the metaphors that she uses in here are drawing from like places of fairy tale and relationships with the body, and I feel like you might not necessarily get the outcome of or the purpose of the poem from just one initial reading, and it's the type of thing that you will want to go back to, and there are particular certain lines in there which you're really drawn to, and then when you start reading them in relation to the rest of it, it kind of broadens your perspective and thoughts of the poem. The other thing which I'd say is that she breaks up poems in interesting ways. Like, there are different types of breaks up in the way sentences are structured and how they're kind of carved up, and it makes you kind of pause and hold on to certain bits and kind of take them in different bites. So I thought that was actually kind of an interesting way of forcing you to unpack what was being said in the poems. But it was actually kind of fun to engage and be mindful of that and think about, why did she do that? What was the purpose behind that? What's this actually trying to make me feel, or where is she trying to direct me on that? And it's just imaginative and fun. It's got that kind of quirky strangeness which is there, but there's humour in here too, and a lot of heart. And actually places where she's being quite exposing and vulnerable here. So it's certainly changed what I initially see and think of Jen Campbell as a YouTube personality, and it makes me kind of appreciate her, I guess, on a different level. So those are all the books which I've read in the month of April. This is enough from me for now. I will see you all again real soon. Okay, bye!